Hey, I'm Jamie from Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to talk about a topic that emerged after I filmed my recent top 10 favorite games of all time as of March 2024. And as I was creating that list, I realized that there are a number of games that I consider to be favorites of mine that I don't actually get to the table all that often, and some of which I have not gotten to the table in over a year, in which case I just decided not to make them eligible for that list. I made them, they were eligible, they were honorable mentions, but they weren't on the top 10 because I figured if it's truly my favorite game, surely I would play it at least once a year. I don't know how sound that logic is, but that was my logic for that particular top 10 list. And it got me thinking about games that I conceptually love, but rarely actually get to the table, and why that is, why I keep them in my collection anyway, and why I love those games. It was a good reason to think about games that I love. So I posed this topic both on my weekly Facebook livecast and to Stonemaier ambassadors, and I got their picks. I asked them, what games do you truly love, but you very rarely play? And I will say, for at least my personal list, I did not include campaign games in this list because those are games that I typically play once and don't play again, even though I might consider them among my favorites. So that to me is a different category than this particular list. These are standalone, for my list at least, these are standalone games. And I think that's how I may have cultivated the ambassador picks a little bit for that. So here are the ambassador picks for games that they love but rarely actually play. Agricola, Battlestar Galactica, Betrayal at House on the Hill, Blood Rage, Dominion, Food Chain Magnate, Gloomhaven, that was a campaign game, Great Western Trail, Honeybuzz, Oath, Obsession, On Mars, Orleans, Power Grid, Red Rising, Robinson Crusoe, Root, Scythe, Spirit Island, Star Wars Rebellion, Terraforming Mars, Viticulture, War of the Ring, and Wonderland's War. And just kind of a broad, this is a generalization for this list, but two things I'm noticing on this list is that many of these games, I think, excel at higher player counts. And many of those games have a lot of player interaction, a lot of direct player interaction. So I wonder if there's something going on there where the games that we more often get to the table. Oh, and also many of these games are longer games, 2 to 3 hour games. So maybe there's some patterns there. I also asked this on my Facebook live cast. The answers there were Earth, Red Rising, Agricola, Star Wars Rebellion, Ankh, XCOM, Game of Thrones, Robinson Crusoe, Scythe, Twilight Imperium, 4th edition, Root, and Summit. So some crossover between Ambassador list and Facebook Live picks. I also wanted to mention here, because for my list, I only considered games that are currently in my collection. And when I look at my collection, I look at my collection once a year, right before the Stonemaier Games Design Day. And I look at games that I haven't played in at least a year. And I bring them up with Megan and I say, Megan, we haven't played these in a year. Should we get rid of these games? And I think I am more inclined to get rid of something that I'm not actively using. Megan is maybe a little bit less inclined to do that, but it's a good filter for me because sometimes I don't want to give away. I try not to give away a game that is fairly hard for me to get back in the collection if I really do love that game. And so normally these types of games, these games that I haven't played in at least a year, are culled out of my collection once a year, but some of them do remain. And some of them definitely on this list are here that as of September or October of this past year, when I should have culled them for not being played in a year, they still remain on my shelf. And I want to look at that today. Like, what is it about these games? Because this is not a knock on any of these games. These are games that I truly love. I love the mechanisms in them. I love when they get to the table, but they just happen to not get to the table all that often. Some honorable mentions first. Azul Summer Pavilion, Everdell, Glenmore 2, Bullet, Shards of Infinity, Patchwork, Honeybuzz, Sundae Split, Blokus, and Namiji. And of these, I actually have played Blokus and Patchwork in the last year. I think I have played Everdell in the last year too, but Everdell is like a once a year game for me. Blokus, I really, really love Blokus, but I've noticed that for that and Namiji in particular, they're awkward box sizes. And so they're kind of out of the way. And so I rarely, as I'm scanning my game collection, I rarely see them. They're also games that, because of their awkward box size, I rarely take them to a game night as a result. So that might factor into these a little bit. But let's go into my top 10, and I'll pull up another screen here. Let's see which layout I want to use today. Let's go with that layout. So for the first pick, my first category is all Stonemaier games. So Stonemaier games, obviously, like I don't publish games. I don't invest heavily in my time and energy and resources into games that I don't love. I love all Stonemaier games. But they rarely get to the table at my table, even though they're all on my shelf. I have a full shelf of Stonemaier games. And I think part of the reason is that even though I would pretty much always play these games, I don't want to, when friends are coming over in particular to a game night, I don't want to push any of our games onto any of them. I would much prefer for friends to bring up my games and say, hey, Jamie, I've been looking to play this game or looking to learn this game. And then I'm happy to share it with them. And I think often I end up giving away our games to a lot of local friends, at least. And so if I am going to, oftentimes, like I'll teach a friend how to play a game, but then they have a copy because I've given it to them, or maybe they've bought it, and then they play it with a separate group with their partner. And so it just ends up rarely getting to our table. Megan and I do play Stonemaier games from time to time. Again, I usually wait for Megan to suggest it, then for me to suggest it. But yeah, here's the Stonemaier list of games, and these are all games that I adore. I adore whether they were designed by somebody else, whether I was the designer or the co-designer. I adore these games. I love playing them. I'd say the one exception, obviously, is Rolling Realms, because I play a lot of Rolling Realms as a live stream, as a solo player. But yeah, Stonemaier games rarely get to the table, even though I love the games that we publish. So that's number 10, every Stonemaier game. I'll also add that I play Stonemaier games a lot, but I play them the most when they're in development, in design and development, opposed to the published version. Anyway, that's number 10. At number 9, we have Scotland Yard. Scotland Yard, I still have my childhood copy of Scotland Yard. I've mentioned it on other top 10 lists. This is a hidden movement game that is perhaps, as far as I know, the first hidden movement game. It distills hidden movement down to the core elements that I want from a hidden movement game. And inevitably, whenever I talk about hidden movement games, I talk about Scotland Yard, someone will pop in and say, oh, but have you played this hidden movement game or this hidden movement game? And I think there have been lots of really cool innovations with hidden movement games since Scotland Yard. But because of the streamlined simplicity of it, I prefer Scotland Yard. Like, I prefer Scotland Yard to anything that's come after it in the hidden movement genre, because it is so distilled. There's one person, and Dr. X, Mr. X, Mrs. X, you don't know where they are for most of the game. And everyone else is trying to land on their space. And if they do, then Mr. and Mrs. X has to reveal themselves to the group. The wonderful thing about Scotland Yard is the whole movement system is very streamlined. I guess it's not very colorblind friendly, but it is streamlined in that if I'm usually red. If I'm the red player, I'm on a yellow hub here, a taxi hub. So I need to discard a taxi token to move from here to an adjacent taxi hub. So from here to here, from here to here, from here to here. Here's a bend over here. I go over to 114. That's all I'm doing on my turn. And you're doing that simultaneously with all the other players. You're all doing one move, and then Mr. and Mrs. X, they take a turn. So that's super streamlined. The other thing that I really love about this game is that you actually get to see fairly early on in the game where Mr. X is. They have to reveal, I believe, on the 3rd turn of the game, and then again on like the 7th or 8th turn of the game. So you're not just stumbling around in the dark the whole game. You get to see where they are, and it creates these big moments of tension and excitement. Anyway, why doesn't this game get to the table more? I think partially is because it's a pretty old game. It's an older game. Not that older games don't necessarily get to the table, but like this is literally like a 30-year-old copy of the game that I have. And like Namiji and Blokus, it's an awkward box shape. And so it's kind of shoved into the bottom of the game pile under some other games. I think that might be part of it. It doesn't travel particularly well in that box. The pieces go everywhere when I travel, so I usually only bring it out at home. And I don't know. It's just part of it is maybe me. I am not suggesting this game as often as I should. But even when I have put it on the table, I think people don't get quite as excited about it as I do. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to dig a little bit deeper into that. And that's what this video is about. I don't have full answers as to why these games aren't getting to the table more, but I wanted to share how much I love them and maybe why I think they're not getting to the table. That's number 9. Scotland Yard. At number 8 is a very small card game from Button Shy Games called Hierarchy. I love Hierarchy. I think it is a really, really brilliant 2-player game where each player has, these are all the cards in the game, And each card has the same content on both sides except for the color. So there's a Baroness in purple, and there's the flip side of the Baroness is in this yellow color. One player is the yellow player, one player is the purple player, or gold. Maybe it's gold and purple. And you randomize the cards at the beginning of the game. So you know exactly what's in the opponent's hand. You're not hiding the secret hand of cards. You just put them on the table in front of you. And on every turn of the game, you are taking turns playing a card to the center row, and you have to play a card that is higher than the previous card. And if you can't do that, you lose the game. That's the entire game. Super simple game. All the mechanisms are built around that concept. I think it's a really, really beautiful streamlined concept, especially when these abilities come into play, because these abilities change things. Like this one says the Dragon. Dragon is a 9 value card. Normally, you could not play a 9 on top of a 10, but it says it can be played atop the Baroness. The Dragon can do that. So they all have these like little exceptions to the rules in there. I love the open information. Why doesn't it get to the table more? I think part of it is that it is such a tiny game. It's kind of the opposite of Scotland Yard. It is such a tiny game that when I'm scanning my shelf to see what I'm going to play, I rarely see it. Part of it is that it is a 2-player only game. And so at game nights, which is the meat of my gaming experience, my gaming hobby is playing games at game nights with a bunch of other friends. We very rarely play just 2-player only games. It's also so short that it's essentially a filler game, which actually would seem like it would get to the table more often as a filler game. And also, perhaps most crucially, and this might be a theme of several of the games on this list, it is not, I would say, one of Megan's favorites. And so if I'm going to play a 2-player only game, it's primarily going to be with Megan. And so sometimes, you cater to you find games that you have in common with your partner, not games that you want to impose upon them. And I don't want to impose Hierarchy upon Megan if she isn't excited to play it. So I think that's why Hierarchy doesn't get to the table all that often. I did play it this past summer at a big gaming retreat. I brought it there and shared it with some people. They seemed to enjoy it, although it's also the type of game that I find that people rarely want to play back-to-back. I do. I would love to play a Hierarchy back-to-back, but I found that most other people don't seem to want to do that. So maybe other people just don't connect with this game as much as I do. That's Hierarchy at number 8. At number 7, we have, if we can load it, Castles of Mad King Ludwig. Let's find a good photo here. I had a photo selected earlier. It looks like it was bumped off. Here's Castles of Mad King Ludwig. This was for a while my favorite game of all time. Just hands down my favorite game of all time. And I got it to the table fairly often. It's a game of I price you choose. So there's one player who's choosing prices associated with the different tiles. All other players are deciding whether or not to pay that price or not. The money goes to the person who priced the tiles. So I love that mechanism. And also the tile placement themselves, they're these weird shapes that as you're building your castle. So you have to build your castle in creative ways with these weird shapes. Some tiles want to be touching other tiles. Some tiles don't want to touch other tiles. And there's a sense of completion because not only do you get a bonus when you place a tile, but you also get a bonus when you complete it. Like when you fill in all of the entrances and exits to that tile, as you can see is done for a number of these rooms. Like this room's completely enclosed. It's really satisfying to do that. I really love this game. And yet I didn't own a copy. I was always playing a friend's copy. And so when on Kickstarter, the Bezier Games put out a giant collector's edition of the game, I got really excited about it. I thought, okay, I'll get this back to the table in this collector's version. And I've only played it once. And that has baffled me because I love this game. And it's actually, I think it's almost easier to set up now in this collector's edition because the inserts are extravagant and really, really nice. The art's also even, I would say, more beautiful in the collector's edition. It's a beautiful game, a lovely game, and yet it doesn't get to the table all that often. I would say partially, again, it is a fairly heavy, big box, and so it is one that I don't often carry to other game nights. And beyond that, I don't really know. It is a game that I really love, and yet, and it is not easy. It is not difficult to remember the rules to this game either. Like I think that's an impediment for some of these games that I love where the rules are fairly complex and complicated. So I don't want to try to remember them to play again, but that's not the case with this game. So perhaps part of the lessons of this list is that I just need to, use this as a catalyst to get more of these games to the table or propose them for game nights. Because partially, I guess maybe we just play so many new games at game nights that we forget about some of the old favorites. So that is Castles of Mad King Ludwig, one of my favorites that I don't completely understand why it doesn't get to the table more. At number 6 on the list is a somewhat similar game. called Isle of Skye. Here's Isle of Skye right here. Here's maybe a pretty nice isle here that this player has created. So this is also an I price you choose game, which maybe part of that is maybe that's a little bit difficult to teach to new players because it's essentially an auction game in a way. And auction games, I think, have a little bit of an impediment to teaching new players. They don't know how to price things or how to value things. But in Isle of Skye, you are pricing 3 different tiles, and then behind a screen, then you reveal the screen to show the pricing for those tiles, and then you get to buy a tile from another player, and then anything that isn't bought, you have to of your own that you priced, you have to pay that price, and you get the tile, and you have to place it in your aisle. And you're pursuing different goals in the game, public goals that change round to round. There's a nice catch-up mechanism. I think the art is kind of a classic Euro style art. I think it ends up looking great on the table as you built your aisle together. It is a lovely game. And I think I know the reason this game doesn't get to the table more. And that is because I don't think the expansions made it better. I think the expansions bogged it down. I think they got it right with the core game and didn't really need to add much after that. The expansions truly make it more difficult to play. The Journeyman expansion, I never even consider playing that one. There is a Druids expansion that is also, like, it's one of those expansions that tried to fix some things, but I don't think the things needed fixing. And it also has, my copy has a bunch of tiles mixed into it now that aren't in the core game. And so when we want to look up what they do, we have to look through 3 different rule books to find out what they do. And so this is a good reminder to me as a designer and a publisher that adding more expansions doesn't always help the gameplay experience, and can even get in the way of a game getting to the table. I've tried to organize my copy so that all that stuff is ignored and I can just pull out the core game components, but I don't know if I've fully successfully done that. And maybe the doubt in my head that I haven't done that is what has prevented me from getting this back to the table. But I do love Isle of Skye. And I almost wish I hadn't gotten any of the expansions, because I think I would have gotten the game to the table more if I hadn't done that. But yeah, Isle of Skye, that's number 6 on my list. And number 5 on the list is the Guild of Merchant Explorers. This game came out of the gates really hot for me. This is a game that when I think my coworker Susanna taught it to me, and then we borrowed her copy, and Megan and I played it 4 different times. I think we played all 4 maps back to back over the same weekend. And maybe that was part of the problem. Maybe we played it out a little bit too quickly, because I then didn't play it for many months, and I brought it to the table with some friends, and I found it to be a fairly tough game to teach, even though the rules are not all that complicated in this game. This is a game where you are flipping a card, and all players are placing tokens on the terrain shown on that card. And it also has an incredible mechanism that I love, where players gain cards that are unique to them that match up with a random card in the kind of the card reveal deck. So I have this random card, or that random card, but I have this special power card associated with the level 1 card. So whenever the level 1 card is revealed, I get this special power. All other players get a different special power that they get to use. I really like that mechanism. But this is a game where at the end of each round, most of your progress in the game is wiped away, and then you go at it again. So it's fairly easy. I would say it's fairly easy to explain the concept of placing stuff on terrain, but it's fairly difficult for players to wrap their minds around the idea that all that stuff is going to get wiped away, and what that means, what the implications for that as they're making early game choices. And also I found it harder than expected, despite the user interface on here that explains it fairly clearly, but I found it fairly difficult to explain what all the different icons mean on the map. I really did struggle with the teach of this game, which surprised me because I did not think it was going to be a difficult teach. And I think that has impeded the game from getting back to the table, unfortunately. But I do really love this game. You've probably seen me in other videos talk about this mechanism. I think this is such a clever mechanism to have this simultaneous play where all players had the same information to work from, and then they build in asymmetry as they play with these 1, 2, and 3 cards. Love that mechanism. But yeah, there's something about the number of icons on the mat tied with the idea that most of your progress is going to be wiped away that makes the game a little bit difficult to teach. And I think that's why it hasn't gotten to the table all that often. So that is the Guild of Merchant Explorers at number 5. Here's a game that I hardly ever mention anymore, even though it has sat on my shelf for, I would say I have not played it in 2 years at this point, and that is Rajas of the Ganges. This is a game that combines many of my favorite mechanisms. It has worker placement, It has tile placement and tableau building. It has ongoing abilities, ongoing powers. It has a little dose of player interaction, but not too much through the worker placement. It has a one-way action selection track. I love this track, this boat track. And it uses dice as resources in a really clever way. It is a really, really clever game. And yet I don't get it to the table all that often at all. And this is one where I don't really know why, because this is a game that is not difficult to teach. It is not difficult to play. I guess it's the concept of the dice as resources is a little bit tough to explain, but once you explain it, it's pretty self-explanatory at that point. All around, I would say it's fairly easy to get this game to the table, and yet we haven't done that. I haven't done that. So maybe I don't even know why. I'm baffled. As I'm looking at this, I'm like, I want to play this game again. I don't know why I have not gotten it to the table more often. So maybe it is similar to Castles of Magic and Ludwig, given that I'm drawing a blank on why I'm not getting it to the table more. Maybe it is simply one that I need to remember is on my shelf more often and pull it off the shelf and get it to the table and propose it as a game to play, because it really is a wonderful game, a game that I particularly love. Yeah, I have no further insights about why this game hasn't got to the table. Let me know if you have any ideas. That's Rajas of the Ganges at number 4. At number 3, one of my favorite games is Clank. And Clank, I've played many different versions of Clank. I've played Clank in Space a few times. That one's definitely not the one for me. I love standard Clank quite a bit. I've played standard Clank with a number of the different maps. I have Clank Catacombs and Clank on my shelf. I think I still prefer the original map of Clank to Clank Catacombs. I've also played through the Legacy campaign of the first Legacy campaign. And therein, I think, maybe lies a little bit of the reason why I have not played Clank in at least a year. It's been a few years, actually, since I played the Legacy game. And I think since then, I didn't play Clank at all after that until we played the Clank Catacombs that came out. And I played that once or twice, but really didn't play it all that often. And haven't played it since. And I think part of it is that Legacy game, the Legacy version. We played it so much over a short period of time that I got a little clanked out, even though I love the game. Also, now I have all my Clank stuff in a giant Clank box. I have it all in the Clank Legacy box over here on my shelf. And so maybe it's a little daunting to get that giant box off the shelf and make sure that I'm only pulling out core game components and not Legacy components. I think I've culled them or separated them pretty well, but still have a little bit of doubt there. So I think the connection to the Legacy game has made me less likely to play the core game. And yet I still backed the Clank Legacy 2. And so I think that's another part of the reason I know something is coming in the future for Clank. And so I'm not as excited to play the Clank that I already have, because I know there's a new Clank Legacy coming that I will hopefully get excited about when it arrives. I've heard people say the same thing about expansions. If they have a core game, but they know the expansion is coming, they might be actually a little less likely to play the game until the expansion arrives. I experienced that with Ark Nova. And so releasing an expansion can actually potentially make players less likely to play the core game until the expansion arrives. And by then they may have moved on to other things. So yeah, but I do love Clank. Clank is a deck building game where you're moving through a dungeon, you're taking different paths. I love the variety of different paths, even when the map is the same. I love choosing those paths based on, when movement comes up and the cards in your hand. So it's a game that I truly love, but seem to get to the table very rarely. It's number 3 on my list. That's Clank. And number 2 on the list is Tzolk'in. Looks like this is maybe a photo from the original release, the German version, a long, long time ago. My copy does look like this, except for that I think I've upgraded the tokens a little bit. But Tzolk'in is one of my favorite engine building games of all time. It has engine building in a number of different ways, through different tiles, through tech tracks, through these, what are they called, like cult tracks, something like that, through even just engine building on the wheels, where you put your worker down and you decide how long do you want to leave your worker on the dial until you pull the worker off the dial and gain a really powerful benefit. So it has this, similar to Viticulture, it has this passive leveling up idea from these dials. I love everything about Tzolk'in. Tzolk'in is one that I do actively suggest at game nights from time to time, but I think maybe other people in my gaming groups have moved on from Tzolk'in a little bit, or don't get as excited to play it. So it's one that I really want to get to the table more often. But, it's a game that came out almost 10 or 12 years ago at this point. And so I think unless I'm introducing it to someone else who might fall in love with it, the people who already know it have already played it a lot and maybe aren't as excited as I am to play it again. Tzolk'in also has some expansions that I think some people really, really love the expansions. I don't know. Again, for Tzolk'in, I love the game out of the core box. I don't think I really needed the expansions. And I find myself, because I'm often going to teach it to someone new, if we are going to play it, that I don't really want to put the special powers in there. I don't want to put special tiles that we have to reference multiple rule books to get to. Yeah, I just want to play with the core experience, which I really, really love. So Tzolk'in is one that I know I will get to the table in the future. That's why I keep it in my collection. But it is one for some of the heavier gamers in my gaming group. They have definitely already played it and played it quite a bit. It's also a game. I wonder how many of these games. That one, Rogers might be looking at games that are on Board Game Arena, because I wonder if that makes games less likely to actually get to the tabletop if people know that they can just play them on Board Game Arena instead. Tzolk'in is on Board Game Arena. It is definitely easier to set up on Board Game Arena. I don't entirely know if I would say it's easier to play on Board Game Arena. Maybe a little bit, but I think I prefer the tactile element of the gears on the table. That's Tzolk'in at number 2. The number 1 game that I have not played in quite some time, even though I love the game. I love every single mechanism in this game. That is Seven Wonders Duel. And I would say this falls into the same category as Hierarchy, except I think Megan likes Seven Wonders Duel more than Hierarchy. I think Megan probably would play Seven Wonders Duel, but most of my gaming time with Megan is campaign games. I mostly play campaign games with Megan now. So Seven Wonders Duel is a dueling version of Seven Wonders with a great card draft where you pick up a card to reveal the cards that are underneath it. You don't really know what you're going to reveal. There are 3 different win conditions that you're pushing towards. I love this game. A lot of people love this game with the expansions. I don't really need the expansions to love this game. I love the core game as is. You're building a tableau, an engine of cards. You're trying to complete your 4 different wonders. Or maybe you can only complete 3 out of the 4. I need to look that up. But you do have 4 wonders to choose from. It is a brilliant game. I love this game. But I think the main reason that I don't get to the table more is that it is 2 players only, and that I primarily play 2-player campaign games with Megan, not 2-player dueling games. It does happen. There are exceptions to that, but we have a lot of 2-player games to choose from, or whenever we want to play a game, we have like all the games in our collection to choose from. And so any one game to the table, which is the 2 of us, is less likely. And so, and when I'm in a bigger group of people, I'm very rarely going to play just a 2-player only game. But I really do love Seven Wonders Duel, and it will stay in my collection. But I will just have to find more ways to give to the table more often. And maybe I just need to be okay sometimes with a game night. Like oftentimes, if we have 6 people, we'll divide into 3 and 3. But maybe sometimes I should say, why don't we do a 2 and a 4? There are some great 2-player games here that I rarely play, that other people might rarely play as well, that are worth trying to play a game night sometimes. So maybe I'll suggest that a game night from time to time. I don't know if I really added many insights into this conversation about why favorite games can get to the table more rarely than games that, I don't know, newer games that we don't even know if they're favorite yet. Or as opposed to other games that I consider my favorites. I don't know if I've added any insights there, but these are my thoughts about the games that I consider to be favorites that rarely get to the table. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I'm about to cough, so I'm going to sign off here. Thank you.